Welcome to Mother's Day 2026. Thank you guys so much for being here. I know we've said that a lot, but we really do appreciate that you have chosen to spend some of your day, the first part of our day, with us. And I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all the moms that are here. And once again, we're just thrilled that you can be here. Did you know that Mother's Day is one of the most attended services in America? It means for us that we probably have guests today. We probably have new people watching online. And so I want to say welcome to those of you that are here. I hope that you're enjoying it so far. And I pray that we have represented Jesus well to you so far, because that's our goal. Speaking of Jesus, if you're new to the whole church thing, if this is your first time ever, you're going to quickly realize that we're very into this guy. We really like Jesus. In fact, it's one of our most said words here at Pond Hill. So you'll hear his name thrown around quite a bit. In fact, Jesus is the reason why we're here in the first place. And odds are you've probably heard of Jesus before. You may have heard his name spoken, maybe at the end of a prayer. You might have seen a sports thing where somebody pointed up and says that it was because of the Lord Jesus Christ that they won their game or whatever. Or maybe around Christmas time, you've seen the nativity complete with Mary, Joseph, the animals, and of course, little baby Jesus in the center. I'd say that last image is one of those things that everybody has seen, right? It's hard to even drive around anywhere around the holidays not to see the manger scene, and we're very familiar with that story, right? A couple from the hill country journey to Bethlehem about 2,000 years ago. The young woman, Mary, is just about to give birth. Suddenly, she goes into labor, but there's this big census going on in Bethlehem, and so all the local inns are full. So Mary and Joseph find a stable, and little baby Jesus is born in a feeding trough for the animals. We've seen the plays, we've heard the stories, we've read it at family gatherings, perhaps. Jesus' birth, meek and mild, as we might refer to it, is an incredible way to frame the story of Jesus. Yet, while Luke, one of the four gospel writers who has recorded the story of Jesus' life, while Luke spends an awful lot of time in this story, the other three main accounts of Jesus' life really don't. In fact, those other three authors spend time on something else. Matthew mentions it for a little while, but he only dedicates 8 verses to it, choosing to focus on something else. You know, it's interesting that we devote so much time to Jesus' birth when it's only really recounted once, maybe twice, in the whole scriptures. The other Gospels, Mark, John, and even Matthew, who mentions it a little bit, have other priorities when they're sharing the good news about Jesus. There's something else for them that's even more important to mention. I want to read from Matthew's account today because I've really been impacted by the way that he describes who Jesus is by drawing a parallel to another biblical figure who came before Jesus. First, let me set the scene. So, sometime after Jesus' birth, Magi from the east come to visit him. They go to the city of Jerusalem, naturally, because that's where the king lives. And through their study of ancient texts in the Tanakh, which most of us know is the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, they've concluded that prophecies and signs in the stars have pointed to the birth of a new king. So they enter the throne room of King Herod, and they ask about a new king in Matthew 2. As you might expect, Herod, who's the current king, is not super thrilled to hear that there's a new king on the way. So the wise men set out on their own to find this child, and find them they did. They present their gifts to him, which are all significant, and they show the royalty of Jesus. We've often seen these wise men in the nativity scenes as well, right? When they leave, they're warned in a dream not to go back and tell Herod where they had found this child. That's where we're going to pick up the story in Matthew chapter 2. So if you have your Bibles, you can open it up to Matthew chapter 2. We're going to begin in verse 13 and read for a little while. It says this: "And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, 'Arise and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt. And be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him.' When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, 'Out of Egypt have I called my son.' Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding wroth. And he sent forth and he slew all the children that were in Bethlehem and in all the coasts thereof from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Then was fulfilled that which is spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream in Egypt, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother and go into the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And he arose and took the child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into parts of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken in the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. I wonder if you've been asked recently how you came to be where you live. This is a really common question. In fact, this week on Friday, I met an old friend from high school, and we were catching up, and both of us asked where each other lives. And we had gone to high school together, but interestingly enough, in between then and now, we both spent a short stint in Ohio. The small talk question is, what brought you there? Or what brought you back to Connecticut, right? It's a common question, and on its surface, you could read the passage in Matthew as an answer to that question for Jesus. Like if you were to ask Jesus, where are you from? You would get this story, right? He might say, well, I was born in Bethlehem, but when I was a young child, we moved to Egypt. Then after a little while, I ended up in Galilee. I guess I'm from this little town called Nazareth. Somebody else might ask, well, what took you to Egypt? He might say, well, you may have heard about King Herod's genocide several years ago. Right after I was born, he ordered all the sons in Bethlehem would be killed because there were rumors about this new king being born. So we were like refugees in Egypt. And somebody might say, oh, wow, I'm glad you guys stayed safe. What brought you back here to Galilee? And Jesus might say, yeah, so after Herod died, his son took the throne. So we thought it was safe to come back to Judea, but not quite safe enough to go to Bethlehem because that's right next door, So we ended up back in Galilee where my parents are from. And this all makes sense, right? This is very natural. This could be a natural-ish conversation, right? But if you know the Bible, you can see something very important going on in this story. Matthew, in his account of Jesus' life, is very careful to draw out all the parallels between and prophetic fulfillments in Jesus' life. Jesus and his original followers, they were all Jewish. Throughout the history of the Hebrews, there are stories everywhere about this guy called the Messiah. He was the new king that the Magi were looking for. Matthew's careful to highlight the moments where Jesus lines up with the messianic figure, but he's also careful to highlight the moments where Jesus' life lines up with the characters from the Tanakh. For Matthew, this is a priority as he writes his gospel. And as we continue this story, Jesus, he grows and he matures. He's almost ready for his teaching ministry, and Matthew highlights a couple other things. He says in Matthew 3:13, we can see this special scene where Jesus gets baptized. Many of you have probably heard about the baptism of Jesus. Jesus leaves his hometown to do so, and in Matthew 3:13, it says, Then came Jesus from Galilee to Jordan unto John to be baptized of him. The river Jordan becomes important for us later because it's an important parallel that we're going to pick up. After his baptism, he takes another major step before his teaching ministry begins. We refer to it as the temptation of Jesus. And in Matthew 4, we can read this. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. And he answered and said, this is a very famous quote of Jesus, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. I want to highlight two things in this story. First is that Jesus is led into the wilderness, specifically the wilderness outside of Jordan, probably west of Bethlehem. Second, Jesus fasted for 40 days during this period, which is a number that has very significant ties to this place called the wilderness. And for some of you, this might be new, but I wonder if some of our Bible scholars, some of our veteran Bible people know where we're going with this. You might be starting to pick it up. Let me recap really quick. Jesus, who was born in Bethlehem, grew up in Egypt. He's a refugee because the king had ordered that all the Jewish boys under a certain age be killed. He begins a significant portion of his life traveling and getting baptized in the River Jordan, which then leads him into the wilderness where he's spiritually formed through fasting and trials for 40 days. Did you guys figure it out yet? There's a very important figure in the Tanakh whom Jesus' early life is mirroring right now. If you know it, you could shout it out. Who knows it? Moses. Yes, good. Moses. Very nice. You guys went to Sunday school? No? Maybe you saw the movie Prince of Egypt? Maybe you read Exodus? Yes. All right, there we go. Good job. Moses is a very important figure in the Tanakh. If you didn't know that, I'll recap his story, remember. But I want to say, remember, Jesus is a Jew. His early followers are Jews. The first churches are primarily Jewish people. The people who wrote the Bible that we're reading today were all Jewish. So the significance of this is important. The significance of how the authors weave in these Jewish stories, history of Israel, and the Hebrew Bible are totally intertwined with the story of Jesus. And no Jewish story is more important than the story of the Exodus. So much so that the Messiah's early childhood is fashioned into the story of Exodus. And if you've seen the film Prince of Egypt or learned it in Sunday school, you're aware of this story and this man named Moses. Let me read some of the story in a moment, but let me give you an overview first. Moses narrowly escaped a genocide just like the one Herod ordered in Matthew. He was a Jewish boy who was adopted into the Egyptian Pharaoh's family, but he had compassion on his Jewish countrymen who were being treated like slaves under Egyptian oppression. After a tussle with an Egyptian taskmaster, Moses flees Egypt. Later in his life, he has a miraculous encounter with God who tells Moses to go back and deliver the Israelites from Egypt. Through a series of miracles, the Pharaoh lets Moses' people go. But as they're leaving Egypt, Pharaoh changes his mind and sends his military after them, hoping to collect the workforce whom he has enjoyed this whole time. In one of the most well-known miracles of the Bible, God splits the Red Sea in half as Moses walks into it, and the people of Israel walk through it on dry ground. As soon as they reach the other side, the waters close, ensuring that their captors cannot reach them to bring them back into bondage in Egypt. God tells them that there's a land waiting for them in Judea, known as Canaan back then, and he will provide for them on the journey there from Egypt. But along the way, through the wilderness, the Israelites grumble, complain, they worship idols, they commit crimes against each other and against God. As a punishment, they end up wandering the wilderness between the Red Sea and the River Jordan for 40 years before they're allowed to finally enter the Promised Land. Once that moment comes, they cross the River Jordan into Canaan under Moses' successor, Joshua, as they've been in the wilderness for 40 years. Does this story sound very familiar to the one that we just read? Look at all the parallels, right? Moses narrowly escapes Pharaoh's genocide and grows up in Egypt. Moses delivers the people from Egypt but spends 40 years with them in the wilderness, the same wilderness in which Jesus was tempted. When they're finally ready to enter the Promised Land, what river do they cross to get there but the river that Jesus is baptized in later, the River Jordan? This is not a coincidence. It's blatant in the text. Why? Well, of course, the Jewish Messiah would mirror the most important event in Israelites' history. Jesus would emulate Moses, the man whom God would use to deliver his people, the man whom God revealed his true name to. Jesus emulates that person. Jesus was here to do something very similar, except not only would Jesus deliver Israel from Roman oppression of the first century, sort of, Jesus would deliver the whole world from the oppression of sin and death itself. Jesus is like a better, more powerful Moses who would provide an exodus not only for Israel, but for the whole world. It's a beautiful story. It's carefully crafted symmetry. It's literarily stunning, and it's one of those things that only God could have orchestrated for us. But it almost never happened. Yeah, so the whole thing that we've been talking about so far is just introductory, because if you haven't heard already, today we're starting a new series, one that I think will stir your hearts and minds. I'm hoping that it will give you a fresh perspective and a unique appreciation for the scriptures and for the God who orchestrated them. So I'm going to read you the title, and then we're going to read the story of Moses' birth under that in Exodus 1 and 2. Our series is called The Faithful Few, Legendary Women Who Did What No One Else Could. Listen to the story of Moses' birth, starting in Exodus 1:8. It says this, "Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph, and he said unto his people, Behold, the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when they're falling out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said, When you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, Why have you done this thing, and saved the men children alive? And the midwives said to the Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, they are lively, and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all the people, saying, Every son that is born ye shall cast him into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took a wife, a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a good child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took him in an ark of bulrushes, and dabbed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off, to wit what she would be done unto him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walking along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maidens to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept, and she had compassion on him, and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh, Shall I go and call thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She called his name Moses, and she said, Because I drew him out of the water. As we look at this well-known story, we read how Moses escapes the order of Pharaoh. We celebrate this, and we look forward to what baby Moses will do in the rest of Exodus. Moses will grow and become someone who God uses mightily, but it would be a tragedy to read this passage and miss the people who protected Moses the whole time. Sure, we could say the person who protected Moses was God, and you would be right, but God doesn't often work in independent ways. He likes to use people in his stories to accomplish his will. He kind of nudges people in the right direction, perhaps. He puts them in the right places. He gives them the right skills to be able to accomplish his will. And in this story, there's at least 5 who prevent the death of Moses in different ways. Each one of them is poised perfectly in the story to fulfill a role that only they can fulfill. And God uses them in ways to protect Moses, which is ultimately what allows him to fulfill the role that he will play later in the story of Exodus. Without these women, there would be no Moses, and the story of the Bible would be forever changed. What these women contribute is absolutely essential to the unfolding of the story. I mentioned earlier that our goal was to uncover these women's stories, and in doing so, my prayer is that we would be inspired to imitate them as we follow God ourselves. Today, I really want to focus on the story itself, because I think it's important that we tell these stories. But I think if you wanted to draw out maybe something practical, a common thread that goes through all these women's stories, you might say something like this. This is kind of like a phrase that a lot of people use, and it's this: simply to choose faith over fear. What really touches me about these women is that they chose to stand up in faith, even though they were resisting the mightiest king at the time and his military. And can you imagine how scary it was for each one of these women in their own roles? We're going to read each one again, but it reminds me of this verse in Acts. It was kind of ringing in my mind as I was writing. Acts 5:29, the early apostles of Jesus say this. They say, "We ought to obey God rather than men." This is in response to the governing authorities of a town who are telling them to stop preaching the word, right? Which is obviously blatantly ungodly and against what Jesus specifically told them to do. And so they say, well, we ought to obey God rather than men. It's very powerful then, but this kind of civil disobedience, bucking against ungodly authorities, is actually all over the pages of Scripture. We often think of examples like Peter, who spoke the words in Acts, or Daniel, perhaps, or Paul. The midwives who speak with Pharaoh in Exodus 1 are no different. In Exodus 1:15-17, it says, "The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name was Shiphrah, and the other name was Puah. And he said, when you do the office of midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them on the stools, if it be a son, you will kill it, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live." And it says this in verse 17, "But the midwives feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive." Well, our translation that we're reading from uses the word fear, which does have a certain connotation today. The Hebrew word yareh can carry a connotation that means to honor, to respect, to consider awesome. It was ultimately their faith in God that led them to do not what the king of Egypt commanded, but what God wanted. Shiphrah and Puah were the chief Hebrew midwives. It was for their profession that Pharaoh summoned them, yet it was because of their profession that they saved the lives of countless Hebrew boys, Moses included. Shiprah's name means beauty or polished. Puah's name means glittery or brilliant. And these women were not only radiant in name, their faith in God led them to spare the lives of many people. It's incredible how much faith they had. It was faith enough to defy the king's direct order and risk likely losing their lives for the sake of others. They chose to have faith over their fear. Moses' mother's name was Jochebed. But we aren't actually given that name in Exodus chapter 2 when we read about her. A later book called Numbers records this name for us. Numbers has a really transparent name. It's just a list of Israelite genealogies. And to be honest, it's a little bit boring to read if you just sit there and read through it. But that's not really the point of Numbers. The point of those genealogies is so that when we read stories like this, we can go and look in Numbers, and it draws out these beautiful details for us, like the name of Moses' mother. An interesting thing about Jochebed is that she's the first person in the Bible to have a name that's derived from the proper name of God, Yahweh. And this makes a lot of sense in this story because it is to Moses that God will reveal that name for the first time. Jochebed is a compound word. The first half of it is Yah, from Yahweh. Hebrew doesn't have J's, which is why oftentimes when it gets translated, we do the Hebrew yod as a J. But Yah is the first half. The second one is a name that maybe you know some people with this name, Abed or Abed, which means glory or worship. Glory to Yahweh or worshiper of Yahweh is what Jochebed's name means. It's interesting to me that Jochebed should bear the name of God for the first time. And I wonder if this creates overtones in the story about the motherliness of God. Though we tend to refer to God as like a he or a him, Yahweh is not human. He's not sexed like we are. In fact, the primary word used for him is a word Elohim, which is actually a plural word. So I won't get into that can of worms too much, but there are several places in Scripture that we actually use motherly language for God. In Isaiah 49, we have one of them. It says this, "Sing, O heavens, and be joyful, O earth. Break forth into singing, O mountains, for the Lord hath comforted his people, and will have mercy upon the afflicted." But Zion said, "The Lord has forsaken me. My Lord has forgotten me." Can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should have compassion on the son of her womb? Yea, they might forget, but I will not forget you. Behold, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands. Your walls are continually before me. Just a theory, but I think it's apt to talk about Jochebed as Moses' mother, and to talk even about how our God compares himself to a mother as well. Listen to Jochebed's courageous faith in Exodus 2:2-3. "And the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him for 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she looked for him an ark of bulrushes and dabbed it with slime and with pitch and put the child therein. She laid it in the flags by the river's bank." Again, with risk to her own well-being, as the military is combing houses looking for young boys to throw into the Nile in accordance with Pharaoh's orders, she hides Moses. And when she can't anymore, she refuses to give up. She makes a boat to send him out of reach of the soldiers. She puts her own life on the line to protect her son. It's hard to say what her long-term plan was, but Moses doesn't take to the waters alone. He's trailed by his sister, who again is not named in the story. But we know her from several passages later. Numbers 26, which I referenced before giving us Jochebed's name, only lists 2 siblings of Moses, both Aaron and Miriam, who will come into play later on in the story. Numbers 26 is not the first time that we hear Miriam's name, though, because she actually becomes a governing leader and a worship leader in the blossoming nation of Israel. The first time she's named is right after Israel crosses the Red Sea. Moses leads Israel in a big song that Miriam joins in Exodus 15. It says this, "And Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. And Miriam answered them, Sing ye to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider have he thrown into the sea." It's interesting that the first time we're introduced to Miriam, the scriptures call her a prophetess. And she's seen leading worship with a short song that she herself composes. Her name, Miriam, means rebellious. And she's described in later stories as being quite fiery. She is fearless as she confronts our last woman to highlight today. Let's read her story in Exodus 2, starting in verse 5. "The daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maidens to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion for him and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister, Miriam, to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She called his name Moses, and she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." To speak of Miriam, I love this story. I can imagine her kind of jumping out of the weeds to confront Pharaoh's daughter as soon as she picks up the baby. She immediately says, this might be hard to raise a newborn child if you've not given birth. So let me offer a solution to you. Just immediately, right? She has a lot of courage here. And again, she's talking to a government official. Again, I think there's a real danger in doing so, that this is a baby who's not supposed to be here, with someone who's not their mother, who's from the family of the people trying to kill the baby. And Miriam jumps out and contends for her. It could have gone very poorly for her. Fortunately, our God has a way of using people who we don't expect in his stories, which is a huge theme throughout all the Tanakh, and even further into the Gospels, and even today. The daughter of Pharaoh is a very unlikely candidate for faith. In fact, it's probably an overstatement to call her a woman of faith. Yet once again, we see a form of godliness in her as she leads with her compassion. She has enough compassion to take on Moses as her own son. She takes possession of him enough to give him a name which is very significant in ancient culture. We aren't even given this woman's name, nor are we told any information about her maidens that are there as well. Yet everyone that day showed compassion on baby Moses. Pharaoh's daughter even paid Jochebed to nurse Moses in a strange coincidence, right? Read God's hand of providence. In a strange coincidence, Moses' own mother is the one to nurse him. But don't overlook that Pharaoh's daughter paid Jochebed to do this. Remember, the Israelites are slaves in Egypt. Pharaoh's daughter doesn't have to pay for anything. She shows compassion to this baby, and she humanizes Jochebed as well. I'd say this woman is remarkable and deserves our respect as well, even if her life may not have been in as much danger as Miriam, Jochebed, Puah, and Shiphrah's. All of these women showed incredible faith as they protected the life of Moses. And it's because of them that Exodus played out the way that it did. The most important event of the Tanakh only could have happened because of the protection of these women. So vital was this event that it shapes the early life of Jesus, whom we worship today. These women were not only there, but they were active participants in God's work. Surely these women's faith was legendary. Their stories are worthy of our time. Their names deserve to be heard. They deserve honor and respect. They deserve to be imitated as we too seek to have faith over fear as we follow God.